to some extent in effect today because Philadelphia is the only state in the union that has state stores where liquor is still controlled. There's a long history to that, which goes back over 100 years in the state legislature. The big thing is sales of liquor in public places, and one of the places that where businessmen wanted to have such sales was at the ballpark. They were prevented from doing so for a long, long period of time. Finally, in the early 30s, the restrictions begin to ease up, but it's very, very tough to get a drink, especially on a Sunday. And in consequence of that, you have people drinking at the ballpark, drinking outside the park because they can't get it inside, trying to sneak stuff in the ballpark. There are a lot of terrific stories. The bullpen at Shibe Park, which was in the right field corner, had an exit which was maybe half a block from a local tap room. And you hear these urban legends all the time, but I think it's pretty clear that a lot of the relief pitchers would go out, especially, in a rare occasion if Phillies are winning 9-0, you get a relief pitcher. Goes down to the bar and gets a couple of drinks and comes back in because he can't get it at the ballpark. So the drinking is connected to this wider social issue of liquor control in Pennsylvania.
And do you think that might have something to do with why Philadelphia is such a big tailgating town now, not only for the Phillies but also for the Eagles? It's Philly's definitely among pro teams. I mean, college teams, it's a huge thing, but among pro teams, Philly is one of the top ones in terms of how many people hang out before the game drinking. Do you think maybe that has something to do with?
Well, certainly there is a part of it there that is a tradition. We can't drink in the park. We're going to drink outside the park. I just think it's that Philadelphians drink a lot. But it is interesting because the tailgating that I normally see is Midwestern, which is real. There is a big, long-standing tradition there. I mean, you see it at Miller Park, for example, in Milwaukee, is extraordinary. But the only other place that's comparable to that I've seen is down here at Citizens Bank Park.
Okay. Now, obviously, in the late 60s, the Phillies started really working hard to get a new stadium. You think in hindsight, do you wish they had instead put the money into rehabbing Shibe? Would that have changed that whole neighborhood? Would that have, and now we see everybody wants these ballparks that look like Shibe Parks, starting with Camden Yards.
They're retro. I mean, they're designed to look like, Citizens Bank Park is not Shibe Park, but it's designed to look like a park from that era. It's quite interesting. I have a couple of theories about it. First of all, Bob Carpenter, who was the owner of the Phillies, was kind of a very, very rich kind of playboy, but instead of liking girls, he liked baseball. And he ran the team as kind of a little hobby he had. He was not at all a kind of comprehensive baseball man who was, let's say, interested in development of minor league franchises or interested in the ballpark as a place where he could make money. He wasn't interested in the commercial aspects of sales in the park. So he let Shibe Park go to rack and ruin when he took it over in the mid-'50s. I mean, he said, I actually interviewed him at length, and he said, I wanted that place like a hole in the head, and I was not interested in, and he just let it run down. And when it got into his head that it was so run down that, wasn't really efficient for him to play there, his idea was not to fix it up, but to get the city to put in a new park for him. And this is the era when cities are being held up to do that, to keep their professional sports teams. And there were a lot of negotiations about it. But
a rich tradition that's carried on today.
That's right. But he did have a good sense of what the market would bear and how the city would come through for him. And At first, he ran into a stone wall in the 1950s. There was a big reform government in Philadelphia politics. And these kind of patrician reformers wanted nothing to do with supporting a ballpark. Then the machine took over, the ancestor of the organization that's still the Democratic organization that controls Philadelphia today. And that was a machine that was run by blue-collar politicians. And they understood the importance of a park to Philadelphians. And they're the ones who supported the bond issues that gave Philadelphia the vet. Now you want to ask about the vet. Was it as crappy as everybody says?
Yes.
I would say that too, but it actually gets built with a lot of places are getting built like that. First of all, it's kind of inexpensive for the people the politicians,
right,
because it can house two sports.
And
right?
you don't have and you don't take care of grass.
That's right, and you don't have to worry about the maintenance in the way you do with an all grass park. So there's a kind of sense of what
fiscal responsibility.
Right.
I guess.
Yeah. Right. Or at least what you can call fiscal
right,
responsibility. The other thing is, in the it's built in the 60s and 70s. This is the era of the Vietnam War, when Americans, or at least some Americans, think of themselves as being the equivalent of Imperial Rome, and they like these huge facilities that kind of look like a Colosseum. And
right, especially from above.
Yes.
The bird's eye views
yes.
of
and
them are
if you
incredible.
look at not just the vet, but other places.
Three Rivers.
They're all, Three Rivers is the one I was going to mention. They're all more or less alike. They look like Rome. And I still think it has something to do with our image of ourselves as being this great imperial power. Now, we got over it, and you want to go back to Shibe Park. I mean, that's what they're trying to do with
right,
the vet, or they're trying to do with Citizens Bank Park. But you got to understand why the vet was built and what a shabby place Shibe Park had become when they finally let it go. I mean, most of those parks have gone. Fenway and Wrigley
right,
are the only ones that survived.
Right. Now, you said you talked to Carpenter.
Yeah.
Did he have any regret about letting Shibe Park go and building the vet?
No.
No.
By that time, actually, I talked to him and his son, who was Ruley. I don't know if you remember him, who was the guy who put together the team that won in 1980. And Ruley was a much shrewder baseball man. I mean, he said to me, what you want is a smaller park. If people think they can get tickets anytime because the park holds 65, 70,000, they're not going to buy their tickets. He said, but with a park that holds 40,000, they worry, am I going to get in? And they're
right,
going to buy tickets. He had a much better sense of these issues and was much clearer about the deficiencies of the vet. The father didn't care.
Right. Okay, so now we'll conclude with how do you feel about going to Citizens Bank? I mean, obviously you're a fan of Shibe and you're a fan of old ballparks. How does Citizens Bank hold up?
My kids love it. We have 2 sets of season tickets. I get invited when they don't have a girl or when some friend can't go with them. I like it better than the vet, but it's hokey. I find it, kind of, it's made up. I mean, they got the Schmitter and they got Harry the K's and Ashburn Alley. I mean, it's what I call instant tradition. I mean, they haven't let these things go to develop, but they put them in place at once. So I like it, but I hesitate about saying bravo, I guess I would say.
Are there any of the throwback parks that you're a big fan of? Have you been to Camden Yards?
Yeah, I've been to all of them. I tell you the truth, Fenway and Wrigley still do it for me.
Yeah,
we go out to Chicago every year to see a game at Wrigley, and it's
really?
And I know a lot of people will now tell you that place has really kind of outlived its usefulness because it's has so many technological defects, but as a place to watch a ball game, I don't think you can beat it.
No, it's incredible, and it's
Yeah.
a national treasure.
Yeah, that's
hopefully.
right. I agree. And it's made that neighborhood. I mean,
Right.
Wrigleyville is great. Fenway, I think, is less of a great ballpark, but the Red Sox have such a terrific tradition there that
Right.
you can't. How can you knock it?
And both of those are somewhat spin-offs of Shibe.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, they were. It was first, and then I think
Fenway is 1912.
12
and
is
then
3
Wrigley,
years later.
1914,
Yeah,
I think.
right. Yeah.
All right. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for talking with us for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Hello and welcome to Philly Base. Well, let's start like that. All right.
Good.
Hello and welcome to Philly Baseball History. I'm Johnny Goodtimes, and today I am talking with Bruce Kuklick, who has written the book To Everything a Season about Shibe Park. Bruce, tell us real quickly, what inspired you to write the book?
What inspired me to write the book? Very good question. When I was a kid, my father had taken me to Shibe Park, or Connie Mack, well, actually called Shibe Park when I went there. And at age 16, I discovered girls and stopped being interested in baseball. When my daughter got to be 7 or 8 years old, early 80s, she got really wrapped up in the Phillies, and we started going to the vet course. And I thought to myself, what was that other park my father took me to, Shibe Park? And being a historian, I kind of tried to figure out what had happened to the park and everything like that. And before I knew it, that park had gotten a hold on me. And I spent 5 years at a place called Temple Urban Archives, which has all the records of this stuff, to write the history of it that I did.
All right. Now, back then, the Phillies played at the Baker Bowl, which is about
At
6
first,
blocks.
they played in the Baker Bowl up through the late 1930s.
Right. They played in the Baker Bowl up to the late 30s, and of course the A's were just 6 blocks away playing at Shibe Park.
Right.
How did people in Philadelphia decide whether to be A's fans or to be Phillies fans?
You didn't decide. You were an A's fan. The A's were the lead team. They were a spectacularly good franchise in comparison, certainly to the Phillies, but also, in comparison to some of the other franchises in the American and National League teams at that time. And if you were growing up in Philly, you were very naturally an A's fan. The only people who were Phillies fans, basically, were people who lived right around Baker Bowl, people who were in some kind of strange way rebels against the system, so they didn't like the A's. There wasn't any question of it. And I grew up an A's fan, as my father had. My uncle was a Phillies fan, and he was regarded as this loser. I mean, my mother called him the last male virgin in captivity. She told us growing up that your Uncle Buck had to have someone follow him around with toilet paper, and he was the Phillies fan.
Uncle Buck, I love it.
That's right.
That's a perfect name for the Phillies fan. So how did Shibe Park compare to the Baker Bowl?
The Phillies had been, because they were such a poor franchise, poor financially, poor also in terms of their ability to win games. They were always on the edge. They played in a lot of places, all of which were run down from the late 19th century up through the late 1930s. The last place they played was this place called Baker Bowl, which is out there on North Broad Street. They had a fire. It collapsed in the middle of the '39 season. They had to do something, go elsewhere, and so they moved as kind of as renters into Shibe Park, which was owned by Connie Mack, who was by that time the owner of the Philadelphia A's franchise. And Shibe Park had been built as one of the first concrete and steel stadiums in 1909. It was very comparable to Wrigley and Fenway. wasn't.
And it was revolutionary
Yes,
at the time,
right.
was
At
it
the
not?
time,
Yeah.
it was, and by 1939, it was 30 years old, so it wasn't, primo park, but it was still considered, first class and first rate. So the Phillies, in moving in there, got a leg up, although it didn't help them very much. What it mainly did was to make money for the Philadelphia Athletics, who were always scrambling for money. And it also made, you can imagine this, scheduling of games really extraordinarily difficult, because what it meant was that for the whole baseball season, there was a major league game going on basically every day or every night. 154 games were played in there, half
Right.
the Philly season and half the A's.
And then you had the Philadelphia Stars trying to work in any off days, right?
You had, whenever there were off days, there not only were Afro-Am teams, but also rock concerts. There were some, the political campaigns were in the winter, but there were boxing matches. There were all sorts of big public events that were housed at Shibe Park, because it was one of the very, very few places that had large enough seating for a big public event. The park, one of the interesting things about that park by the early mid 1940s is it really beat up. People think about it as this beautiful place, which it was. I mean, if you ask old timers, they'll say they can never forget walking into this concrete place and then going out into the field, which is this bright green grass. But it was not in great shape by the time the Phillies had been there for 5 years.
All right, what was the best thing about Shibe Park in comparison to other parks? What did it have that was unique, or what did it have that people really enjoyed about it?
First of all, it's small. This doesn't make it unique, but it's like maximum 35,000 people, which gives you a very close-up and very distinctive experience of the game. There also had, although this had changed by the time the Phillies had gotten there, there was a lot of local activity. This was a multi-ethnic working-class neighborhood in North Philly. Just as the fans at Wrigley today have built all of these stands on rooftops to look at games, that was true of Shibe Park, at least through the early 1930s. It changed afterwards when the franchise decided to stop the people from doing that and built the fence called the spite fence. But there were a lot. I think people went out there because it was a real neighborhood scene. You've talked some about tailgating. You didn't have tailgating at Shibe Park because you're right in the middle of a neighborhood with very little parking. But you do have a lot of bars around there which were very friendly and oriented to the baseball crowd. So you'd have a lot of people drinking before the game. You'd have a lot of street life. You had a lot of characters who made in some ways their lives by performing in informal ways in front of the ballpark. So I think all of those things lent it as kind of special.
So almost like sort of like a Wrigleyville.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is it was very much like Wrigley. It reminds me a lot of Wrigleyville when I go to Chicago to see games.
Uh-huh.
And at the same time, it's a very lively place because you've got baseball there practically every day.
Right. And
sometimes you would have a Phillies game in the afternoon and an A's game at night. It was used with that degree, that kind of intensity.
Now, what was the worst thing about the park?
Well, was the worst thing about the park? I would actually say by the 1940s, the teams that played there. The A's had their last great period when they were winners in the early 1930s, and then they went into what turned out to be a long-term decline from which they never recovered. The Phillies in the late 30s and early 40s are miserable teams. Right. There are a couple of seasons when both teams are there were not very many people remember this. Used to be 8 teams in the National League, 8 in the American. The A's and the Phillies were at the bottom of the standings together for a couple of years. So I would say the worst thing is the fact that these teams are not very good. But then, as you know, the A's got so bad that they were forced to leave the city, went to Kansas City in '54, and it happened at a time just when the Phillies, for one of the few times in franchise history, came into their own with the Whiz Kids of 1950. So the evil days of the late 30s and early 40s are kind of transformed in 48, 49, and 50 when the Phillies really looked like they're going to be a sustained dynasty. Now, that didn't work out, but Phillies fans didn't know it in 1950 when the team won the pennant and played the Yankees.
Right. Yeah, and they still had a couple more decent years. They just never really reached the top of the National League.
Yeah. But it was only in 1950 and 2009 that they played the Yankees in the World Series.
Right.
And I'd still give a lot to have them have won 2 more games in 2009.
Oh wow, you and me both. That was a rough one. That was very winnable.
Yeah.
We won't go there.
Yeah.
So we talked earlier about the drinking outside of the ballpark.
Yeah.
Part of that is because Philadelphia or Pennsylvania has such tough blue laws. It did then, and it does now, but it's not at the ballpark.
Actually, it's quite interesting.
But that had a lot to do with why so many people would hang out before the game and maybe try to sneak a flask in during the game, whereas in some other cities you had teams just selling beer at the ballpark.
Yeah.
But the Connie Mack always fought to have beer at the ballpark, and it never worked out. Correct?
Right. Well, he the two places that are really let's go back a step. Philadelphia, part of Pennsylvania, has this whole series of restrictions on drinking.